Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
One day, I simply lost my job at the tech company. Budget cuts, they said. Doesn't matter how good you are when the numbers don't add up. I tried to find another job, but the market was tough. Weeks turned into months, and my savings were drying up fast. My landlord wasn't exactly understanding. He'd tell me to pay up or get out. I was desperate, and that's when I made the worst decision of my life. I walked into that old Navy store in Federal Way with a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was all I had. I figured I could snag some expensive jeans and sell them online. When I was stuffing jeans into my backpack, I overheard two employees talking. One asked the other if they'd heard about the new security measures. The other employee said they hadn't. So the first one explained that corporate had been putting trackers in some of the high-end items to crack down on shoplifting. Trackers? I hadn't planned for that, but I was in too deep to back out now. I grabbed as many pairs as I could and bolted out of the store. I thought I was in the clear until I saw the police car. The officer got out and started walking towards me. He called out telling me to stop right where I was. I panicked. I dropped the bags and ran as fast as I could. I could hear the officer shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I just kept running. When I turned a corner, I saw a busy intersection ahead. The "Don't Walk" sign was flashing, but I couldn't stop. I had to get away. That's when I heard the screeching tires and a loud thud. At first, I thought I'd been hit, but when I looked back, I saw a woman lying on the ground. A car had swerved to avoid me and hit her instead. Everything after that was a blur. More police cars showed up, and I knew I was done for. They caught me a block away, out of breath and scared out of my mind. At the police station, I learned the full extent of what had happened. The woman who got hit was actually the store's loss prevention officer. She had been following me and relaying information to the police. The detective questioned me, asking if I really thought I could just walk out with $550 worth of jeans. I stammered out that I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt and that I was just desperate. The detective then told me that I was in serious trouble, listing off the charges: theft, evading arrest, and indirectly causing a pedestrian accident. He made it clear that things weren't looking good for me. As I sat in that interrogation room, the reality of what I'd done started to sink in. I'd ruined my life over some stupid jeans. But then something unexpected happened. The loss prevention officer, who thankfully wasn't seriously injured, asked to speak with me. She wanted to know why I did it. I told her everything. Losing my job, the mounting bills, the desperation. To my surprise, she listened without judgment. She then told me that while what I did was wrong and there would be consequences, she'd seen too many people throw their lives away over mistakes like this. She offered to help if I was willing to make amends. She spoke to the detective and the store manager. They agreed not to press the most serious charges if I agreed to pay back what I stole, do community service, and get counseling. It wasn't an easy road, but that encounter changed my life. The loss prevention officer even helped me find a job once I completed my community service. Now, whenever I pass by that old Navy store, I remember the day my life almost ended and the day it started again. My child, my precious little one, diagnosed with a brain tumor at just 8 years old. The doctors gave us 6 months, maybe less. It felt like the world was crumbling around us. We'd noticed changes in our kid's behavior: headaches, mood swings, trouble with balance. At first, we chalked it up to growing pains or maybe stress from school. But when the symptoms got worse, we knew something was seriously wrong. After countless tests and sleepless nights, we got the devastating news: an inoperable tumor growing aggressively. The prognosis was grim, but we were determined to make the most of whatever time we had left. That's how we ended up practically living at the children's hospital. Between treatments and tests, we tried to create some sense of normalcy. Game nights in the hospital room, movie marathons on the tiny TV, anything to see that smile we loved so much. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that our world was shaken yet again. My spouse had stepped out to grab some coffee, leaving me alone with our sleeping child. I was lost in thought, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine when the door burst open. A woman in a white coat stormed in, her face twisted with anger and impatience. Before I could even react, she started berating me. She accused me of being selfish. When I asked who she was, she introduced herself as a doctor and explained that she had a patient who desperately needed a heart transplant. She claimed my child was a perfect match. I was stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. Was this some kind of sick joke? I told her I didn't understand, as my child was still alive and fighting. The woman coldly said that my child was going to die anyway, and questioned why we wouldn't do something good and save another life. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I felt sick to my stomach. I told her to get out immediately. She called me ridiculous, arguing that her patient had a whole life ahead of them. Before she could finish her sentence, I stood up, placing myself between her and my sleeping child. I repeated my demand for her to leave. She insisted she was trying to save a life and accused me of prolonging the inevitable, urging me to be reasonable. By this point, I was shaking with anger. I pressed the call button repeatedly, praying for someone to come quickly. I told her she had no right to be there and threatened to call security. She protested, claiming she was a doctor and had rights. Just then, a nurse rushed in, taking in the scene with wide eyes. When asked what was happening, I explained that this woman had barged in and was demanding we let our child die for organ donation. I pleaded with the nurse to remove her. The nurse's face hardened as she turned to the so-called doctor. She told the woman to leave immediately, stating that her behavior was completely unacceptable. When the woman tried to protest about her patient, the nurse cut her off, threatening to call security if she didn't leave at once. The woman huffed and puffed but finally stormed out. The nurse stayed with me, checking on my child and assuring me she'd report the incident. My spouse returned shortly after, horrified when I recounted what had happened. About an hour later, we heard a commotion in the hallway. Curious, I peeked out the door to see the same woman arguing loudly with hospital security and what looked like the chief of staff. The woman was shouting that they couldn't do this to her and that she was trying to save lives. The chief of staff told her that her behavior was not only unethical but potentially illegal, and that she was suspended pending a full investigation. The woman called it ridiculous and referred to our child as a brat who was going to die anyway. At that point, 2 police officers approached. They'd been called by hospital security. One officer calmly told the woman that they needed her to come with them. She protested that they couldn't arrest her and demanded to know if they knew who she was. The officers explained that she wasn't under arrest but needed to leave the premises. When she refused to go quietly, they had no choice but to handcuff her and escort her out. When they were leading her away, she kept shouting about how unfair it all was and how we were denying her patient a chance at life. It was surreal, watching this grown woman throw a tantrum like a toddler. The chief of staff approached us afterward, profusely apologizing for the incident. He assured us that the doctor's actions were completely against hospital policy and ethical standards. They'd be conducting a thorough investigation and taking appropriate action. Apparently, the doctor had been under a lot of pressure with a high-profile patient needing a transplant. She'd gone rogue, searching for potential donors without going through proper channels. Our child's medical information had been accessed without authorization, violating numerous privacy laws. The incident led to a complete overhaul of the hospital's security protocols and a review of their ethical training programs. As for the doctor, she lost her medical license and faced criminal charges for her actions. It was a small consolation given everything we were going through, but knowing that she'd never be able to put another family through such trauma brought some peace of mind. In the end, we focused on what really mattered, cherishing every moment we had left with our brave little fighter. The love and support we received from the hospital staff, other patients' families, and even strangers who'd heard our story helped us through those difficult months. While we couldn't change our child's prognosis, we could ensure that their remaining time was filled with love, laughter, and as much joy as possible. And that's exactly what we did, holding on to hope until the very end. I've been living a quiet life since I retired from teaching high school English 10 years ago. Never married, no kids, just me and my cat, Mr. Whiskers. You'd think it'd be lonely, but I've got my books, my garden, and a nice group of friends at the local community center. Life was pretty peaceful until these scam calls started coming in. It all began about 7 years ago. I got this frantic call from someone claiming to be my grandson, saying he was in jail and needed bail money. Now I may be getting on in years, but my mind's still sharp as a tack. I knew right away it was a scam. After all, I don't have any grandkids. But instead of hanging up, I decided to have a little fun with it. These calls kept coming, about twice a year like clockwork. Each time I'd play along, spinning wild tales and wasting their time. It became a sort of game for me, seeing how long I could keep them on the line. I figured every minute they spent talking to me was a minute they weren't scamming some poor soul who might actually fall for it. This last call, though, that was a doozy. It started like they always do. The scammer asked if I was his grandmother. I pretended not to know who was calling. He then claimed to be my grandson and said he was in trouble and in jail. I acted surprised and asked what happened this time. The scammer hesitated and said he got into a fight and needed $4,000 for bail. I told him that was a lot of money and reminded him of the time he supposedly stole my car and pawned my jewelry, leaving me with nothing. The scammer tried to deny it, but I scolded him for lying. I mentioned that the only thing I had left was my Beanie Baby collection, which I'd been collecting since he was young. The scammer tried to steer the conversation back to the bail money, but I kept talking about the Beanie Babies. I told him they'd be worth a fortune next year and asked if he knew how to use eBay. He insisted he needed cash, not Beanie Babies. I explained I couldn't send cash because it might get lost in the mail, so I'd sell the Beanie Babies instead. I started listing my valuable Beanie Babies, like the Princess Diana bear and Peanut the elephant. The scammer tried to interrupt, but I scolded him for being rude. I continued talking about my rare Beanie Babies, including Bessie the cow and Legs the frog, with his tag error. The scammer grew impatient and insisted he needed the bail money right away. I told him to be patient and started to tell a story about fighting off a burglar with my Legs the frog, Beanie Baby. When he interrupted again, I agreed to help but said I needed to ask him something important first. I asked if he told the police about what happened at the cabin, mentioning an incident with his uncle. The scammer was confused and said he didn't know what I was talking about. I accused him of playing dumb and brought up a story about a gold digger he supposedly brought to Christmas dinner who left his brother before the wedding. The scammer tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding, but I acted offended that he was calling me a liar. I reminded him of a time when I was sick in the hospital, and he promised to come back to Jesus and stop hanging out with bad people. I said I'd give the money to Jesus directly instead of him. Finally, I revealed that I knew he wasn't really my grandson and that I had no grandchildren. I explained that I'd been wasting his time on purpose to prevent him from scamming others. I told him I'd recorded the conversation and threatened to report him to the police if he ever called again. And with that, I hung up the phone feeling pretty pleased with myself. I managed to keep that scammer on the line for 57 minutes, a new personal record. I like to think I saved a few other elderly folks from falling for their tricks that day. As for me, well, I treated myself to a nice cup of tea and settled in with Mr. Whiskers for an evening of knitting. Just another day in the life of a retired English teacher turned scam buster, who says getting older can be exciting. I've been in the IT industry for over a decade now, and let me tell you, it's been quite a ride. I started as a fresh-faced graduate, eager to make my mark in the world of technology. Over the years, I worked my way up from a junior developer to a team lead, tackling increasingly complex projects and honing my skills. When I landed this job as a lead in an IT firm supporting a US client, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The pay was good, the work was challenging, and I was excited about the prospect of collaborating with an international team. Little did I know that I was stepping into a world of conflicting expectations and never-ending work hours. From the get-go, I realized that balancing the demands of two managers, one in India and one in the US, was going to be tricky. My Indian manager was all about contributing to the organization, beyond our client work. He'd constantly push us to take on extra tasks like recruitment or preparing business reviews. Meanwhile, my US manager, who was also Indian, was laser focused on keeping the client happy and avoiding any escalations. At first, I tried to be the perfect employee, juggling client projects, daily meetings, and these additional tasks. But as the days went by, I found myself working longer and longer hours. The lack of overtime pay started to grate on me, especially when I realized both managers were taking advantage of our willingness to go the extra mile. Our workday became this strange, disjointed affair. We'd start at 10 a.m., work until 5 p.m., take a break, and then log back in from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. to align with US hours. But more often than not, those evening sessions would stretch well past midnight. One hectic day, I decided to work from home. I had back-to-back meetings scheduled, a 3-hour client call followed by a knowledge transition session. I was looking forward to a productive day without the hassle of commuting. That's when my US manager decided to throw a wrench in my plans. He messaged me on our team chat, asking to schedule a meeting that day. I explained that my day was packed until midnight with client meetings and a knowledge transfer session, and asked if we could schedule for tomorrow instead. He insisted that he needed 30 minutes of my time that day, saying it was important. I tried to suggest he join earlier before my meeting started, but he refused. Finally, I asked if 12 a.m. would work for him, and he agreed. Now, I was already frustrated with the constant demand of my time, but this request pushed me over the edge. If he thought it was okay to eat into my personal time at midnight, why shouldn't I do the same to him? With a mischievous grin, I scheduled the meeting for 12 a.m., his time, which was 10 a.m. the next day for me. The next morning, I logged in at my usual time. At 10 a.m. sharp, I joined the meeting. To my surprise, my US manager was already there, looking tired and slightly annoyed. He questioned why I had scheduled the meeting for midnight his time. I explained that he had said 12 a.m. was fine, so I assumed he meant his time, just as he expected me to be available at midnight my time. He protested, saying he meant 12 a.m. my time. I took this opportunity to highlight the issue of constantly adjusting our schedules to accommodate US hours, often working late into the night. I asked if he thought it was fair that sometimes he might need to adjust his schedule too. He tried to argue that it was different because we had to align with client hours. I acknowledged that, but pointed out that we were also human beings who needed rest and personal time. I explained that being available at all hours would affect our work quality and well-being in the long run. My manager paused, then admitted he hadn't really thought about it from our perspective. I expressed my gladness that we were having this conversation and suggested we work together to find a more balanced approach that didn't require anyone to be available at midnight regularly. He agreed and said he'd bring it up with the team to come up with a better schedule that respected everyone's time zones. After that conversation, things started to change. The US manager became more mindful of our working hours, and we established clearer boundaries. He even advocated for us with a client, explaining the challenges of our time zone differences and negotiating more reasonable meeting times. My Indian manager got the message loud and clear. He never again expected me to be available past regular working hours unless it was absolutely critical. Gradually, we developed a more efficient system that allowed us to meet client needs without burning ourselves out. Sometimes all it takes is one person to speak up and challenge the status quo to make a difference. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.